Hello and good evening and welcome to a very special conversation. Today, actually, we're going to be discussing religion in India, tolerance and segregation. This conversation is based on a special report that is done by the Pew Research Center, which is a non-profit, non-partisan and a non-advocacy organization. This show has been brought together and organized by the India Foundation in collaboration with NewsX. So I would like to welcome all my panelists before we start this conversation. I am joined by Dr. Neha Sehgal. She is an associate director at the Pew Research Center and also the author of this report. I have also Dr. Omkar Joshi. He's with the Department of Sociology, University of Maryland, and he's also he's contributed to this report. And Professor Sunaina Singh, she is the Vice Chancellor at the Nalanda University. We'll also be joined by Dr. Lavanya Vemsani. She's a Professor of History at the Department of Social Sciences at the Shawnee State University, and she specializes in Indian history and religion. Given the times that we live in, I think this report really holds a lot of importance. And though Neha is, the Pew Research Center is non-partisan, but, the topics, the points, I'll ask her to, help introduce the report and highlight some of the key findings. But the times that we are living in, I think this report really highlights a lot of things. The topic itself I found pretty interesting. It's slightly paradoxical also. There's tolerance and yet there's segregation. And Neha is actually going to explain how this works in India, especially. I think they've interviewed nearly 30,000 people, Indians, for this report. This was done on the eve of COVID, I think late 2019 and early 2020. But before we start the discussion going, I'm going to first ask Neha to, take us through some of the key findings of this report, and then we'll get the conversation going. So Neha, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Priya, and thank you to the India Foundation as well as to NewsX for having us here. Priya introduced me very kindly as the main author of the report, but I just want to clarify that there's a whole army at the Pew Research Center that dedicated a lot of its time to this study and to treat India and this subject fairly. I have the honor of presenting some of the findings and participating in this discussion. But this is, in fact, a combined effort of a number of people. And with that, let's get into
I was being kind to you on the Sehgal quota also, Neha. I noticed you and I have the same surname.
Exactly right. We have the same surname. It's spelled exactly the same too. So thank you for the Sehgal kindness. All right, let's begin with the main findings of the Religion in India survey. I'll begin with a quick introduction to the Pew Research Center. We are a nonprofit research organization. We do not take any policy positions. We are nonpartisan. We are not for or against any political party. And our funding comes through the Pew Charitable Trust, and that's our primary funder. We also partner with a number of other philanthropic organizations to do our work. And in particular, our religion work is often funded by the John Templeton Foundation. And some of the results I'll present to you today, they're all all of the results are freely available to the public. We do not have any commercial interest in doing this kind of work. We do it because we feel that good data is essential to a good democracy, and that policy making as well as policy discussions in any country should be informed by data. Which kind of enriches the public dialogue. And that's really our main purpose in doing this kind of work in India, as well as in other countries. So just a little bit about the Religion in India survey. As Priya mentioned, we interviewed nearly 30,000 Indian adults, and we began the fieldwork in late 2019 and wrapped up just as the first wave of COVID was hitting India. Because of COVID, in the first wave of COVID, gaining some momentum, we were not able to access a couple states in the northeast of the country. Sikkim and Manipur had already shut down. And then, of course, Kashmir Valley had shut down earlier. So because of security concerns, we were not able to do interviews in the Kashmir Valley. One other thing I'll point out is the interviews on average lasted about 45 minutes. So what I'm going to present today are just some of the key highlights. If you're interested in more, and you feel like, well, why wasn't this topic covered or that covered? It's possible that it was covered. So I'd encourage you to go to pewresearch.org/India survey to find out more. And of course, if you have trouble sleeping at night, then I highly recommend the entire 200-page report to read. So, what is the religious composition of India? Well, this is not going to be a surprise to anybody. According to the last conducted census, it's of course the vast majority of the population is Hindu, but India is home to significant numbers of minority communities, including Muslims, who are just shy of 13% of the adult population, but then also other communities like Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains. And in this study, because of the large sample size and the way we designed the study, we are able to talk about the opinions of the 6 major religious groups up to Jains. Now, other religious groups like Parsis, for example, or Jews, for example, were interviewed, but because their sizes in the overall sample are so small, we are not able to separately talk about their opinions, but they are represented. Anytime I talk about the opinion of all Indians, they are in fact represented. So what's the story of religion in India? Well, 2 things are happening at the same time, according to the data. On the one hand, Indians express a high level of commitment to the principles of tolerance, and we see this in a number of ways in their attitudes. At the same time, they also desire living separate lives. There is a preference for religious segregation, and both things are happening at the same time, which leads us to the conclusion that Indians have a very different concept of pluralism or of tolerance than perhaps what is known in other countries around the world. Americans will often aspire to what they call a melting pot society. Canadians refer to their pluralism as a salad bowl, but the Indian concept of pluralism is much more like a thali. People respect each other, but they want to be separate from each other. Another way to put it is a patchwork quilt pluralism or a patchwork quilt tolerance. Indians live together, but they live together separately. And while the desire for religious segregation does not seem to diminish the commitment to tolerance, we also find that the desire for religious segregation is highly correlated or highly tied into some of the fault lines we see in India today in attitudes about identity as well as about politics. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to break down these 3 elements a little more, so you'll see kind of how each of these plays out in Indian public life. But let's begin with the idea of tolerance or shared values and beliefs. We do find overwhelming evidence that Indians see their society as highly religiously free. Indians of different backgrounds tell us that they are very free to practice their religion. Vast majority of Muslims say this, vast majority of Hindus, Sikhs, etc., all feel that they have religious freedom in the society in which they live. They also tell us that tolerance is a core part of their Indian identity, and that tolerance is a core part of their religious identity. So they tell us that respecting all religions is very important to being truly Indian. Muslims say this, Christians say this, Hindus say this as well. They also tell us that respecting all religions is an important part of being a Muslim or being a Christian or a Sikh or a Hindu. So it's a religious value as well as a national value. And it's accompanied by a number of shared beliefs that seem to have crossed religious boundaries. So when we ask people if they believe in karma, for example, of course, this is a Hindu belief, and some Jains, etc., hold it too. But you see 77% of Hindus say they believe in karma, but so do an identical share of Muslims. Right? Now, you may say karma is a pop culture belief, right? It's in Bollywood, it's everywhere. Even some Americans believe in karma. But we also ask people if they think the Ganges has the power to purify. Now, this is a quintessential Hindu belief. And not only do a majority of Hindus say they believe in the purifying power of the river, we also find that 1/3 of Christians hold this belief. So you see that these kinds of religious beliefs, as well as many other practices like what holidays, what festivals people celebrate, have permeated some of those patchwork lines. At the same time, though, India's religious communities say that they are very different from each other. So they hold some common values, they hold some common beliefs, but generally the perception of difference far outweighs the perception of commonality. So for example, among Hindus, 2/3, 66%, say that they are very different from India's Muslims. Majorities also say that they are very different from Christians. And Muslims return this sentiment. Nearly 2/3 of Muslims say that they are very different from the country's Hindus. They also see themselves as very different from other religious communities in India. Now, here I'm just showing you the opinions of 3 groups, but if I were to show you Buddhists, Jains, etc., you basically see the same pattern. The perception of difference far outweighs the perception of similarity. There are some exceptions. So now among Sikhs, more people see similarity with Hindus than difference. But still, 42% of Sikhs do say that they are very different from the country's Hindus. And it's the same pattern among Jains as well, perception of difference. And this perception of difference is tied in with how people live their daily lives and how they want to live their daily lives. We find that India is a highly religiously segregated society. And it's segregated in many ways. One chief way is how people view interreligious marriage. We find that Indians generally say it is very important to stop women in their community from marrying outside their religion. It's the same pattern for men. They want to prevent their daughters. They also want to prevent their sons from marrying outside their religion. 2/3 of Hindus say it is very important to stop the interreligious marriage of Hindu women. Among Muslims, the sentiment is even more widespread, 80% saying that it is crucial to stop the interreligious marriage of Muslim women. And it's not just about interreligious marriage. Perhaps, that's a step too far. We also find that this perception of segregation is reflected in how people form friendship circles. So we find that people say that all or most of their friends share their religion. And that's true for the Hindu community, with nearly 90% of Hindus saying that either all their friends are Hindu or most of them are. But even among other groups that are just very small portion of the population, like Sikhs or like Christians, even among them, overwhelmingly, friendship circles remain confined to people's religious community. But what about the neighborhood where people live, right? You have less choice over that many times. We do find that some people would rather live in religiously segregated neighborhoods. Now, I want to be clear that this is not the majority opinion. Most people don't say that they don't want other people, people of other religions in their neighborhood. Still, for a significant share of people, that's a desire that they have. So, for example, among Hindus, over 1/3, about 36%, say that they would not want a Muslim in their neighborhood. And just over 1/4 wouldn't want a Sikh, Buddhist, or Jain in their neighborhood. And similarly, among Muslims, about 1/4 or more would not want to live next to a Christian, Sikh, Buddhist, or Jain in the area where they live. And similarly, among other religious groups, it's not a majority, but it's a significant share of people who would rather live separate in their neighborhood. Among Jains, a majority would not want a Muslim living in their area, and about half would not want a Christian in the area where they live. So what implications do this level of segregation have on Indian identity or views of national identity and politics? I mentioned earlier that tolerance and segregation exist side by side, but segregation does have an impact on Indian national identity as well as politics. Well, for one thing, for a majority of India's Hindus, it is crucial to be a Hindu, to be authentically Indian, to be truly Indian. Nearly 2/3 of Hindus say that in order to be truly Indian, it is very important to be a Hindu. A majority also say that speaking the Hindi language is crucial to being truly Indian. And these two attitudes are highly correlated with each other. Those who say being a Hindu is important to be truly Indian also emphasize the importance of the Hindi language and vice versa. So overall, we find about half of Hindus take both positions. They say being a Hindu as well as speaking Hindi, both are very important to being truly Indian. And this share varies quite a bit regionally, which we can discuss maybe in some of the discussion that will be forthcoming. Now, these are political positions, right? Because we can see that they are highly correlated with how people choose to vote. In the 2019 parliamentary election, about half of Hindus say they voted for the party that won the election, the BJP, right? But BJP's vote share varies quite a bit by how Hindus view national identity. Among Hindus who say that it is crucial to be Hindu, to be truly Indian, a majority say they voted for BJP. But BJP's vote share falls quite a bit among Hindus who see some connection between religion and national identity, but perhaps not quite as strong. And it falls further among people who don't see a connection between religion and national identity. And if I were to show you the same bar chart by views of the Hindi language, you would basically see the exact same pattern. And that speaks to the close connection or the intermingling between three aspects in Indian public life today: religion, language, as well as politics. And overall, we find that there's about 30% of Hindus who take all three positions simultaneously. They say being a Hindu is very important to being authentically Indian. They gave the same level of importance to speaking Hindi, and they voted for BJP in the 2019 parliamentary election. 30% of Hindus take all three positions. So this 30% differs in a number of ways from other Hindus in India today. They tend to be a lot more religious, for example. They are regionally distributed very differently. They're more concentrated in the north of the country. Of course, that's where Hindi is most commonly spoken, so that's not a huge surprise. But their shares fall considerably in the south of the country. But one factor that consistently differentiates this 30% from other Hindus in India today is their views on religious segregation. And this is where I bring back the story of religious segregation in India to where it began. Right? We find that Hindus who voted for the BJP say it is very important to be Hindu, to be truly Indian, and give the same level of importance to the Hindi language, tend to live a more religiously segregated life. They are more likely to say that they would not be willing to accept a neighbor who is a Muslim. They are also more likely to say they would not want a Christian, Sikh, or a Buddhist, or a Jain neighbor. Most of them tend to say all of their close friends are also Hindu. And this sentiment that the interreligious marriage of Hindu women must be stopped is more widespread, or is more fervently felt among this group. So that brings me to the end of just some of the highlights. I would suggest that there is a lot more in this study, including perceptions of caste and caste discrimination, views of Muslims on Muslim courts, as well as discrimination. For all that and more, I would suggest go to pewresearch.org/India survey. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Priya.
Thank you, Neha. That was a wonderful executive summary, if I may say so. But you really have highlighted some of the key points, and also the key paradox as I began, which is there in the title itself. Indians, they welcome diversity across all religions. They welcome, there's a lot of tolerance, but the tolerance comes with certain, marking of turf, if I may say so. You're very happy that there are other religions being practiced in the country, but you don't want to mix them. You don't want to marry outside your religion. You don't want even your neighbor to be from another religion. So literally the lines are very, very well drawn. I'll begin with you, Dr. Joshi, since you've also been part of this report, you've contributed. What is your main takeaway from this paradox, as we say, between the, how tolerant are we really?
Thank you, Priya, for first of all having me here and giving me the opportunity to contribute to. I have seen sort of functioning of right from the beginning of the report in some sense. And I must say, although I did contribute to this report, the views that I am sort of expressing are totally in my personal capacity, and they don't represent the institutional or for that matter, even Pew's view. I think Neha has already done that job wonderfully.
Speak your mind and take a partisan stand, that means.
No. With that in mind, before I turn to your question about the issue of tolerance and segregation, I just want to have one broad remark in which sort of highlights the robustness, and Neha sort of gave some outline about the way in which the survey was conducted. And I want to highlight for the viewers as well as for everyone on the panel that this is sort of a very large sample, which we see here, a nationally representative sample. Some of the previous surveys that are done on these topics, such as I think CSTS Lokniti survey, which was done before, or some of the other kind of surveys are of qualitative nature, or they have smaller sample sizes. So in some sense, I think the robustness of this survey is very evident from the way the sample was designed and questions were asked. So And a third party sort of a Pew is already well known in doing, unbiased kind of reporting, as you mentioned. So that also gives us a perspective that, it's sort of a looking from outside within rather than, some of the people who are involved in this very closely doing this kind of survey. So there is a value and merit to this survey. And I really thank Pew for taking a stab at this difficult topic. I think the point about your tolerance and segregation, I think we have always had sort of this kind of a paradoxical view. And so I did not find it surprising in some sense that you will have this kind of a paradox, because, it is said that, at the same time, the statement and its opposite is true in India. So you can make any statement and you will also find the converse of it true in India. So for me personally, this did not came to be, as a surprise. But in terms of the way in which tolerance is sort of framed, I think at the ideological level, there is respect and equality and belief in terms of ideas. But clearly, the practitioners of religions know that there are some of the practices which are different. And not only that they know that they are different, but they want to maintain it that way. And personally, I do not see that as, something which is a bad thing. It's just being aware of those differences and living with it.
Professor Sanena, your first takeaways from this report, really, what struck you as the most dominant note?
Thank you, Neha. Thank you for having me this evening. Religion in India, the very tolerance and segregation, I find this not just paradoxical, but I think this does not reflect the true Indian sensibility to my mind. Because when we look at tolerance, to my mind, I would put it as harmony. India has been known for, being, the very matrix of harmony that drives all of us. So that's one thing. And then segregation, I don't know, probably I would look at it as pluralism, because we look at there's a flourishing history of pluralism in India, for thousands of years. Suddenly we focus on tolerance. I somehow felt the report is not doing justice to the contemporary India as well, because 1.3 billion population, and we are talking about 30,000 who have been, while my compliments to Pew Research, I think it needed a little more focus on other aspects that would highlight the Indian ethos per se.
May come in, Professor. The timeline of the report also was, 2019, early 2020, at a time when the CAG protests were going on, when the Delhi riots broke. So there was, I think the word tolerance really comes into play when these things happen in the backdrop of all this.
But does it reflect the entire sensibility of the 1.3 billion population? That's my concern. Are we only focusing on pockets of people? This is where, because we are known for our syncretic culture, and by and large, Indians have been extremely tolerant, if you must use that word. But I think the principle of harmonizing has been very important. So if we seem to be focusing only on the recent past, and that to a few incidents, do they reflect or are they representative of Indian sensibility? That's my question. Do they truly reflect the true India? We need to look at it a little differently, I thought. And perhaps we need to reflect on the word religion per se. If we go back to the thousands of years of our culture, I think the word here, dharma, is routinely translated as religion for us. And I think it's a very profound concept, more encompassing. This cannot be taken away by pockets of disruptors to showcase in India. I think we're talking about New India, and we are looking at even where we are talking about marriages or food choices. I think it's a matter of food, where food is concerned. Just to give an example, it's a matter of faith, be it Jains or Buddhists. So focusing just on Hindus and Muslims perhaps is not right. I thought that does not really truly reflect. It's a matter of faith, what we eat. And
Just
that should
saying
not
the exceptions don't make the rule. I'm going to get Dr. Vimsani in also, after which we'll take a break and come back and continue the conversation. But first, Dr. Vimsani, your opening comments on the report.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I am cautiously optimistic about this report. It is definitely an update over the previous reports. Certainly brings out far more information representative of Indian society, but there are issues. However, I would have to note at the outset that it is colored by a new imperialist lens influenced by Americanism instead of the previous British imperialist lens. Too many terms betray Americanism and American history rather than Indian reality. The questions on diet, caste, and religion target Hindus unfairly. The question on diet, especially, since it included only beef, otherwise cow. I'm sure if it included other animals such as horse, pig, dog, or
It does. It does include that Muslims have the same problem with pork. That is part of it.
Reactions. It is limited in nature, that's my point. As a scholar working in the area of decolonizing history, I'm wary of the manner in which the report is set up through these questions, most of which target Hinduism. I'm also concerned about the usage of the loaded terms, such as segregation in relation to India. This term has specific connotations in the American South, which might not be applicable to India. Application of these terms might lead to a new colonized narrative of Indian society, but this time through application of American frameworks rather than British imperialist frameworks we knew earlier. This might seem far-fetched to those not working in the area of decolonization, but a narrative is already being built. I have heard some South Asian scholars compare Jim Crow South to modern India while ignoring most basic aspects. I don't know how much influence these scholars have on creating Pew Survey, conducting or preparing the final reports. However, the way in which terms such as segregation are slipped in inconspicuously into the report indicates that there might have been certain influence from this section of scholars. Terms such as segregation are associated with grave events and legal precedents in the American South. These terms evoke certain historical events specific to American history, and as such, caution must be employed while utilizing these terms in other contexts, especially with regards to large pluralistic secular democracies such as India. Finally, the growth of religious minorities itself is an indication of the more than optimal support they enjoy in India. Every minority religion has shown growth, while majority religion, Hinduism, has shown decrease. Although question 8 showed no change in previous Pew's, but previous Pew survey has showed that Muslim population is expected to grow 76% by 2050, increasing to 311 million. Similar growth in other religions, while Hindu population is expected to decrease to 76.7% by 2050. So by contrast, the Hindu population, wherever they are a minority in South Asia, decreased. Therefore, in South Asia, India is the most successful society when it comes to pluralism and democracy, and the report has actually failed to bring that out. And it introduced terms such as segregation, which brings, imperialist connotations. So I am optimistic, but cautiously optimistic.
On that optimistic but cautious note, I'm going to take a break and come back and discuss some of the issues that have been raised by our panelists that we're having on a report prepared by the Pew Research Center called Religion in India, Tolerance and Segregation. This and I would also like to again thank India Foundation who has helped us organize this conversation, and of course in collaboration with NewsX. Neha, since you were one of the authors of this report, a lot of questions have been raised about the report, but if you can just take them briefly, because I really want the conversation to go further than not just the report, but rather as to where we stand in India in terms of religion and diversity. And Professor Sunena also made a good point on re-looking at religion and tolerance. That's what happens when we have a professor on the panel. But I think that those concepts would be interesting to discuss also. But if you would like to take some of the comments that have been raised, then the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Priya, and I'll be brief. And thank you, all three of you, for it's an honor to be in the same panel as all three of you and your eminent expertise. So I appreciate all of the comments. Thank you to Omkar for reiterating some of the methodological rigor behind this report, which I do think is important to note. I'll also add that some of the questionnaire development for this report was based quite a bit on the qualitative work we did in India. We did a whole lot of focus groups and cognitive interviews. And what we tried to do was capture in the closed-ended questionnaire how Indians were telling their story. So we found over and over again that they had a particular way of telling their story, which we then tried to capture in a closed-ended format. Professor Sunaina and Professor Lavanya, I appreciate your comments, and I also think some of it I appreciate very much that you're coming from a historical or an anthropological perspective to a report like this. So I think there is a difference in kind of what we are trying to achieve, right? And what perhaps you might try to achieve in some of your work, and what you can achieve, we cannot. Because I think the depth that you can provide and kind of the discombobulation of concepts that you can provide is something we cannot do. Right. So a survey is 1 inch deep and 500 meters wide, right? Whereas anthropological work and historical work is 500 meters deep and 1 inch wide, right? So it's just a difference in kind of what we are trying to achieve here. So I appreciate that some of your criticisms are coming from that angle, right? But that's not, that's very fair, right? In terms of that's not the goal of the survey. I will highlight a couple things, though, in terms of the representativeness of the sample. We are routinely doing surveys in the United States, election polling, et cetera, in the United States, where we draw a sample of roughly 1,500 or 2,000 Americans. Now, you might say, how can 2,000 represent the opinion of 300 million Americans? That's ridiculous, right? But survey sampling is a particular art. It's extremely technical. And the important part is that you draw a sample in a way that allows you to talk about the opinions of the whole. And therefore, if there are exclusions to the sample, like in this case, Kashmir Valley or Sikkim and Manipur, you have to be very clear about that we do not represent the opinions of those groups. And then secondly, there's weighting in the survey. So what we also do once we draw the sample, if we feel that we are not representing less well-educated people as much as we should, because India has a lot of data. It's a very data-rich country. It's a census. There's a bunch of government surveys. So we can kind of take a look and adjust, right, the representativeness of the sample in that way as well. And those are two ways the sample becomes nationally representative. I also want to clarify with regard to editorial control. So it would be easy for me right now to just say any sort of editorial criticisms you have are all on our scholars who advised us, but actually that would be completely incorrect. I take full responsibility for any editorial problems, and my team takes full responsibility for any editorial concerns you might have about the report, because we maintain complete and total editorial control over all of our products. That's a part of our nonpartisan stance, and we feel that we cannot let others guide us in terms of editorial what choice of edits. So in terms of the use of the term segregation, that is completely our choice. In fact, when I first presented the main storyline to my boss, whose expertise is in American politics and American religion, and when I presented him the finding, he objected to the use of the term segregation because of the same reasons you just pointed out, Lavanya. And he said, how can you use this term? This has a particular connotation in the American context. And my response to him was, but we are not targeting this report to Americans, are we? Right? We are targeting it to Indians in an Indian audience, and they don't have the same connotation of segregation that Americans do. So why do we need to be concerned about what it means in America? Right? America is out of the picture. Right? So in some sense, Lavanya, your criticism was this is neo-imperialist, but in my argument to him, it was forget America. We are not talking to Americans. We are not releasing this report in America. We want to talk to Indians, and they have a different understanding of this term. So let's respect that. Right? So in some ways,
okay. I'm going to cut you short because I want to bring the others in. Professor Sunaina, the understanding of segregation, do you agree? In fact, Also, Dr. Vemsani raised an issue about, how the fact that the Muslim population in India is growing faster than the Hindu one shows that actually how tolerant India is in terms of, tolerance and diversity. And part of the report says that the Muslims of India feel that they have more in common with Hindus in India rather than the Muslims of Bangladesh or Pakistan. So in terms of being national, in terms of being Indian, it's the same, there is some kind of a common ground between these other religions, with all the religions. So then the word segregation, where does it fit in all this?
Well, it doesn't fit in at all, according to me, because this is building a narrative on segregation does not reflect an Indian ethos at all. Because as you rightly pointed out, and the part of the survey also shows that the Indian Muslims or Muslims in this part of the world are very happy with the kind of, there's a harmonizing influence. And also remember that the Indian culture per se, it's lokaha samastaha sukhino bhavantu, where we look at how the entire world needs to be. So we're looking at a multicultural, multi-religious, multilinguistic nation that has harmonized different cultures. And we are talking about dharyate iti dharma, where upholding and sustaining everyone has been the basic premise of the nation. So this is a nation that has given birth to different religions, and we all live very harmoniously together. So building a new narrative based on a few incidents, I think is not the right reflection of India. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think I would relate to what Ms. Lavanya said, because this is a different kind of interpretation that we are bringing in. Perhaps we need to be a little more understanding and reflect on what has been said about India. Roman Rolla, said that, it's the tolerance of Indians or the Indian religion may be surprising to religious believers in the West. I think that's where America, Europe comes in, because this has been a part of integral Vedantic culture that we've had. And also this reminds me of Jonathan Swift, who said we have enough religion to hate, but we do not have enough to make us love one another. So is the Pew report also focusing, I'm sorry about this, Neha Sehgalji, but are we trying to create a narrative which is divisive? Are we focusing on things which may be problematic? Are we trying to project Indian identity as basically intolerant, who believe in segregation? Whereas, all our life we have lived together and we have not looked at whether our neighbor is a Buddhist or a Jain or a Muslim. I think that there has been a seamless harmony here. I think that's something we are now focusing on. So should we focus on it now? Should we highlight that? So perhaps I would think that the survey could have been a little more forthcoming in looking at the positive side rather than focusing on some of the questions of the survey I have found problematic. I think we need to change the pointers. We need to change the pointers. That would be my recommendation.
My request, sure, Dr. Joshi, you can come in, but my request would be to let's take the conversation beyond the survey because we have very limited time. So if you want to quickly interject, then I will.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for allowing me to interject. I just want to piggyback on what Professor Vemsani and Dr. Singh said. I think we are reading too much into the word segregation, and I agree it's a loaded term. It has historical kind of baggage in some sense in the American context. I think the idea is in terms of how living arrangements are shaped in India in today's society and whether those living arrangements are basically reflective of the actual realities of India or not. And I think in that sense, if we look at it, and there are studies about it in terms of how communities are living. And this is not just, we must not look at it only from the present context, even in the historical context within Hinduism also. For example, if you see Shaivas and Vaishnavas, where they resided and their communities and where their temples were. So it's not just in the present context of this kind of a segregation. If we are sort of in some sense triggered by the word segregation, I think we can definitely I mean, that's a fair point which Professor Ramsani brought about. But I think in some sense, we need to look at the realities which have some historical kind of a linkages and which are not necessarily to suggest that basically that it's a fractured society, but that's how people have been living even. So there is a historical lineage to that. That's the point which I wanted to make. Thank you.
Okay. In fact, my takeaway was actually different from yours, Professor Sunaina. Because yes, there are differences in the segregation in the narrower term, in terms of community living, in terms of in the marriages between religion, or in terms of even who your neighbor is. But on the larger picture, the important question on nationalism, what it means to be an Indian, I think there is a lot. The report says 70% of Sikhs say that those who disrespect India cannot be a Sikh. I gave the example of how the Indian Muslims feel more empathy with the Hindus in India than the Muslims outside. So, Dr. Lavanya, I really want to bring this question to you. Is there? I find that there is more tolerance than segregation. The word harmony that Professor Sunaina used really is what stands out in the report for someone like me. I don't know whether you would agree with me on this or not.
Yes, I agree with you. There is actually more tolerance and cooperation within Indian society, which the report failed to bring out. The report actually brings out more. This is more on segregation. The way the questions are set up also contribute to it. And as I already noted, many of the questions actually unfairly target Hindus. And I'm also baffled by the nature of political questions and then the way they are tied to political identity. Because the language that was asked was Hindi, Urdu and Bengali were not included, which were also widely spoken in India. And of course, it's problematic since India is a multi-party democracy, not two-party democracy, and ballots might run into 30 pages or long. So tying it to party, religion, it's too narrow. The outlook that this report has brought out is too narrow, too focused, too unfairly targeted Hindus with these questions, the diet, religion, language. So it failed to bring, we were really hopeful, but it failed to bring out the true nature of Indian society and true nature of tolerance in India. Another Pew report, I already noted, another Pew report brought out the projections for 2050 for India, religious projections. And Muslim population is supposed to grow by 76%. So, of course, it's all tolerance. Otherwise, why would a minority grow? In other countries around India, minorities are actually decimated, vanished. So do you think that is more cooperative, more harmonious than India? In all of South Asia, Indian society is more tolerant, more harmonious, more helpful to its minority neighbors. And this report actually failed to bring that out. By its excessive focus on language and targeted questions towards Hindus and using the words, the Americanism, the terms that are used, the neo-imperialistic terms that are used, really did not help understand India. I'm sorry, Neha, you have done excellent work, but I'm really, really sorry. Somehow, this has failed to bring out the true nature of Indian tolerance and Indian harmony.
Professor Sunaina, there's also the question of caste. The report also looks at that also. And do you feel that is caste again a dividing or a unifying factor? Forget the report. I just want your impressions on that question.
First of all, caste system itself has been, this is a European notion which has actually already divided people into thinking in different ways, because we have a Varnashrama Dharma and it was not based on birth or fate or anything. It's a different thing. It's a cause and effect. So caste system per se, the way it has been projected again is problematic. We live in a land where the caste lines seem to be blurring. If you take a look at the cosmopolitan, the metropolitan society, if you look at a few pockets, then perhaps there are issues there, which probably need to be looked at from a different angle, because we have welfare schemes as well, which highlight on caste. So, we are there is a polarity here where we are trying to blur the lines. At the same time, we highlight it by a lot of other schemes. So caste has been a issue, the way it has been projected and the way it is viewed in India. But I think by and large, the intercaste marriages, the cosmopolitan, the globalized world, I think the lines are blurring, excepting for the rural India and pockets of that. Most of the rural India there as well, the cities have been encroaching into where are the rural areas, the villages are no longer. There might be a few, but still, we need to look at it from a different lens. We seem to be focusing on how do we create a divisive narrative. I'm sorry about it, but I think the questions needed a little more caution how we look at it. The survey is done very well, extensively, I would say, looking at different things, but I still maintain that the question should have been different. And they should have been.
But Dr. Joshi, the reality of caste exists even in our politics. Since you can talk about it, we have the BJP, the great Hindu party, which actually says that, which is against the caste system. We have Savarkar talking against caste system. We have the RSS, which is against the caste system. Yet when tickets are given, it is on the caste system. That is the reality, really. So, and the Pew report also says that, for instance, that there is more Dalits feel more discriminated against in the south than the north. There are various pockets, as Professor Sunaina has said, which may exist, but it's not just a pocket issue; it is a national issue.
I think I in terms of the politics part of it, I would not rather comment on this, but the society part of it, as a sociologist, I think I would definitely want to comment in terms of the salience of caste as an identity, which sort of is something which is present across religious lines. I mean, if you see actually that it's not just within the Hinduism that this kind of identity exists, but it also does amongst Christians, Muslims, and Sikhs also, if you see the report carefully. But apart from that, the larger point is that some of the beliefs, or very often people talk about some of the dietary restrictions, I think, which was one of the parts which was mentioned earlier, that is something which is followed across religions and by all caste groups. So if you see some of the tables on page number 112 and 13, where they talk about, whether eating beef or pork, and the question for pork is asked to Muslims. So whether does that make in some sense you less Muslim, kind of a thing. And I think majority of the Muslims have agreed with that. And even if we look at by the caste breakup in terms of general caste versus lower caste, I think that belief is held. So in some sense, I think as an identity, just like the other identities like region or language, this is something which is present across religions. That's the thing which I would want to highlight.
Last few words for you, Dr. Vemsani. Is there anything unifying that you find? We talked about segregation, but the tolerance part, did you find anything of that in the report?
The Indian culture, I would say, and I'm glad my panel has about the caste. And caste, of course, is not a system. It's not across the country, and it's not state imposed at any time in history. These are peer regulated groups. And for those interested, I would suggest please read R.C. Guha's caste book. It actually shows the historical dimensions of caste and how it is spread across religions. So for tolerance, of course, there is enough tolerance. and Indian culture and civilization. Pluralism is built into Indian civilization, Hinduism. Of course, the conversions happen, but the conversion doesn't mean that they completely forget their Indian civilization. Anytime a person moves into another country, another religion, another place, they also carry their values and their culture. So that's what we see here also. And this forms the background of tolerance in India. The Indian civilization, the values that are built into it, the values towards life, and Indian civilization and its values permeate the religious divisions. So, yeah, that's what I would add. Thank you.
Thank you. And Neha, well, would I be fair to conclude on the note that, the report does bring out the link between the national identity and religion also, and it is a unifying link rather than a divisive link. I would, what is your last word on that one?
Absolutely. I mean, a couple last words. One is that the beauty of public opinion is that my own personal opinion or my own personal background is largely irrelevant. Or so the couple of times it was said that this is based on a few incidents. Actually, it's not based on a few incidents. It's what people say, right? So we ask them some questions. You may disagree with the way the questions were asked, but this is their response, and that is the only thing we're trying to put forward. So I appreciate very much that your personal experience or the experience of the people around you might differ, right, from those of others. So in terms of Indian national identity, there again we find a paradox, right? On the one hand, people do say that respecting all religions or being tolerant is central to Indian identity, right? At the same time, there is a sense that being Hindu is also central to Indian identity. Both exist together, and I think that's again, like I think was it Lavanya who said in the beginning, like when one thing is true in the East, the opposite is also true. And I believe actually it was Rudyard Kipling who said that, maybe originally, origins unknown, but that is borne out. I mean, there are a lot of paradoxes in Indian society. It points to the complexity of this society, and all through it all, it is incumbent upon us as scholars to bring forth both. People are rarely entirely tolerant or entirely intolerant, right? That's very rarely the case. So it is incumbent upon us as scholars to bring forth a balanced picture and represent both sides, right? And put that in the right context.
On that note, I would like to thank all of you for taking time out to come and take part in this conversation, to the Pew Research Center for bringing this report, and of course India Foundation for getting all of us together for this. But at the end of the day, I think there is a positive note also. Everybody does agree that what really stands out is maybe Professor Sunaina, your favorite word, harmony, and there are incidents of divisiveness, but those are incidents, and the natural fiber of the country is one of harmony, of other religions living together, everybody living together. And by and large, on the larger issues on national question, I do find there is a lot of agreement amongst all the religions, and that I think is the biggest takeaway from this. But thank you all for this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.